We're going to be spending the remainder of the afternoon discussing the components of the strategy. We've left time to also come back to some of our placeholders that we talked about yesterday afternoon. And Anna's going to help keep us on time. I think we're going to go through each of the segments, and we figured about 10 minutes of discussion and potential Q&A to the BLM? Per segment, okay, so. And while we'll be sort of noting possible recommendations, we're not going to spend the time right now to wordsmith possible recommendations. We will come back and do that from 3 to 4. That'll give us an opportunity to have a break and collect our thoughts. So I guess the first component that the board wants to take a closer look at is the sustainable herds. And that's in our books. That's on page 7.
If folks in the way back could hold their comments.
And so I guess we can go through this. Well, let's start with, do any of the advisory board members have general comments or questions about the sustainable herd thing? Especially questions, because this gives us an opportunity to query Carla on it. She gave a pretty good overview this morning, but for the details information, you want to just go down, the first goal and the objective one. Does anybody have any further questions on that? Which is maintain the population of wild horse and burro within the established AML for all of the HMAs.
Yeah, I think that statement, a goal statement, should also include the necessity of having total horse population in balance with such that the annual increase is absorbable in society. Our problem is long-term holding, because we're producing more damned horses than we can dispose of. And if we don't recognize that as a fundamental to a good horse management program, there's something wrong.
So it's maintain the population of wild horse and burro within the established AML for all of the HMAs and for the number of animals that can,
with society's ability to absorb the annual increase. To me, that's fundamental to a goal statement on the horse program. Balance with the capacity of the land and in balance with society's ability to absorb the annual increase.
That was the secretary's statement.
Yeah.
That was in the original. That was in the original.
Yeah, and it's disappeared. That's been recommended by this board going way back to 1992.
Right. So,
Because I wrote it originally.
okay. Now, with regard to action 1, the whole issue about the budget constraints, and again, we're not wordsmithing now, so are there any specific questions with regard to any further questions with regard to the budget restrictions resulting in the 7,600 figure?
Well, we do, as I mentioned earlier, we do need to make sure that there is a backup plan.
Okay.
Because, we're starting out behind the ball. We need to be able to catch up as quickly as we can so that this process, this plan might actually have a chance of working.
If in fact it's true that we have no more summer gathers,
We'll be
starting
behind
3,000 horses behind the 8 ball.
on full crop.
Okay, so we need the backup plan on action 1. Action 2, that's consider adjustments to AML through in-depth analysis, but in another part of the strategy, it said they're going to wait until the NAS study to determine whether they're going to do an EIA. I mean, it's similar.
Well, AMLs are looked at for adjustments or readjustments on every gather. why are we suggesting here, or at least I think we're suggesting, that we're gonna back up and take an overall look at all AMLs again?
That's a question to Carla. Do you know whether the BLM, by action two, we had some discussion in terms of, does that mean that they're scrapping everything and starting from scratch? Or, I mean, that's the one spectrum of it. Or do we have, or is this just more of the same ongoing thing? I'm under objective 1, action 2.
And action 2, consider adjustments to AML through in-depth analysis of herd and habitat monitoring data and following appropriate NEPA analysis with public involvement. And this is truly what we attempt to do with all programs every time we have an issue come up, like a resource management plan may need to be amended because now we have sage grouse to be concerned about. So AML would be considered at that same appropriate time, considering all the data we have and appropriate public involvement. So what that means is that there's not going to be any broad sweep of the hand and a change of AML. It would potentially occur at site-specific levels.
Okay, it's business that sort of the ongoing aspect of land use planning.
Yes.
Okay, and that was one of the concerns. Renee?
Will we see some of that already taking place as BLM goes forward with the RMP amendments for sage grouse?
Probably.
Okay.
Okay,
So some of it will be handled at that point.
That,
Right.
that's as it should be.
Right.
I didn't read that to mean that.
What it may mean is additional emphasis on really looking at it.
Well,
There may be additional scrutiny on AML.
maybe the word consider is throwing us off. Maybe it should be like continue adjustments to AML, because it's an ongoing thing. When
Through
we,
the land use planning process.
I think that there was some concern that the strategy was indicating we need to start from scratch, like halt to everything, and, start from scratch on all the MLs. And I don't think that's what this is saying, but it probably could be clearer.
I think if you insert
Continue.
the language that Wayne just provided, where it says through the land use planning process, I mean, that is a very well-defined BLM process.
Okay, and again, the purpose of this discussion is sort of just to make some notes to come back, and wherever Anna is, we'll come back and see if a recommendation can be carved out of some of these.
I'd just like to mention that this is an area that getting the right numbers was a comment that we heard from all the different constituent groups. Okay, this is one that's very broad, and people saying get the right numbers. And I'm just concerned that if we wait until NIS for what is the best science for establishing this, that then it's going to be another 2 to 3 years until we get a good process in place for doing numbers. So if we have an opportunity to do adjustments between now and the end of that study, we should take them. So whether it's through the regular land use planning process, or if there's any other opportunity to get the right numbers, we should do it and not wait.
And I made a note on that, under science and research, under the NAS component.
It's just-
for that.
just- What we just said, what was just talking about.
Objective 2 has to do with sort of the fertility control. Did you guys have something further you wanted to add?
You're almost done your 10 minutes on this section.
Okay, fertility control. There are several actions under here, the CTR, the herd sex ratios, the sterile mules introduction, and non-reproducing component in the number of herd management areas. Did you want to comment on?
No, I tend to agree with those four, actions, that objective action.
I know from my constituency base, and personally, as with regard to non-reproducing components, sterile animals, some of this we don't yet have. We may have the science to do it, but we don't have the science on how it would impact herd the integrity of a herd. So my concern is that if the Bureau goes ahead with some of these things, that there are some things put into place that will do like an evaluation before the actual thing. And I would think that most of us are in agreement with that, but maybe not.
I think that applies more to all of that.
Right.
Not just the.
All of objective 2. So, objective 2, I think there is a consensus around the table that before going into uncharted waters, that we want to make sure that the safety of the animals and and we want to know what the impact may be on the herds themselves.
I got a question for Boyd. Are there other fertility control out there other than PZP that should
There
not
are.
be ignored?
There are a number that are, I mean, probably the most obvious one is the GnRH
Like spay back,
drug that's being,
spay back.
evaluated
Yeah.
at the Theodore Roosevelt,
Theodore Roosevelt National Park.
That's at Gonacon,
Bonacon.
yeah.
There are some out there, and of course, there is research, there's investigation into, spaying mares and that sort of thing, but I don't know, I think when you're at the top of the objective, when you say use a wide range of fertility control and other population control measures, I think you're including that whole armory of different methods of fertility control.
And that was my concern, I didn't want to limit.
By
it
not,
to
yeah, I think because it's not in every action down here, I don't think you're excluding any of those other options should they arise to be, viable.
Objective 3 is implement actions to improve wild horse and burro management within HMAs. Do folks have a question or a point of discussion under objective 3?
I'm not sure how voluntary agreements with livestock operators is necessarily improving wild horse management.
It's just an
It's just
option for
perpetuating numbers.
management.
Well, I think it might be an alternative to long-term holding. I mean,
I don't
in
see how
discussion-
that
in dis-
improves management within an HMA.
I'd like to do just a little bit of wordsmithing on action too. Identify opportunities to mitigate impacts to wild horse and burros where appropriate from authorized activities on public lands. What I would say is impacts between wild horse and burros and other activities
Yes,
on public lands.
it works both ways.
Yeah, it is because, you're talking about endangered species that do have a certain priority.
So a more holistic
But all
approach,
the,
right.
all the uses out there, they're legitimate.
Okay. And we probably need to be careful not to get too bogged down, because I don't think Carla was looking for actual, edits. But this is gonna help us frame whatever recommendations we come back with from 3 to 4. Objective 4, gather efficiency and expand the use of gather techniques. I think, are we in general agreement with that objective, that there's always, things can always be more efficient?
Yeah, and personally, I would like to see the, bait and water trapping where it's practical used instead of the gathers they've been doing whenever possible. It's just a lot less stressful on the horses. And
Okay.
especially if, if the BLM is gonna go in the direction of trying to pay attention to band structure and stuff like that, which is, pretty important in a lot of respects to the integrity of the herds. Bait and water trapping, you can identify bands a whole lot easier, and you can be a lot more selective about removal of horses so not to disturb that. And I think that's kind of an important component to this.
Okay. Are we able to move on to objective 5? That's to conduct rangeland health assessments, herd health evaluation, habitat monitoring, in order to verify appropriate management level ranges and determine progress toward attainment of healthy rangelands.
I think that's a crucial objective.
Yeah, and I think that's,
I think that's the core of this entire, program.
that you have to have the healthy rangelands, or you don't have anything.
Without that, you'd have nothing.
That's right.
Well, does that mean that that needs to be objective 1 and not objective 5?
Well, a question to Carla is, are these in any way listed in a priority? I didn't think they were, but we should double check. They're not.
Well, it's kind of incorporated in one, saying,
So it's our
Healthy
understanding that the goals and objectives are not prioritized? Correct. Okay, good. Okay, now, I know we're a little late, but ecotourism.
Ecotourism?
Tourism. Provide opportunities for ecotourism and value-added opportunities for local economies while maintaining the health of all wild horses and burros and the public lands. So they have one objective, develop public recognition for wild horse and burro herds. Is this sort of a, seems to me, I know the strategy eliminated the treasured herds, but is this sort of a byproduct or in lieu of, or?
Actually, I think it's more of an attempt to help those communities that value these horses kind of exploit those horses for tourism opportunities, and it also helps the horses get better exposure to the public. So we're promoting opportunities for volunteers to help with those tours, to help people understand the horses.
And BLM's already doing that.
Yes, but we could do more.
Okay, so so this segment is really just increasing where able?
And a reaffirmation.
Right, reaffirmation, okay.
Carla, I'm wondering, is this an area where under grants.gov, someone could put forth a proposal? I know that when you had mentioned them before, they applied to the preserves or sanctuaries. Are you also asking for requests for proposal for ecotourism?
You know, I don't think so. What we have in many places already are people that have special recreation permits. They pay the BLM a fee to make a profit from public lands by taking tourism groups out there. So it's a low level cost. It's like $3 or $5 per person per day. But they also, they run a business doing that. They're basically an outfitter or a guide. So we want to encourage more of that. There are maybe places where there's not that business going on where we could encourage volunteer groups to do that. But we don't want volunteer groups to compete with people that are doing it for profit, because, you know, you just don't compete. You don't have volunteers compete with for profit.
Okay, so any more questions on the ecotourism? And we can move on to pastures and partnership sanctuaries, where there are several goals. First goal is to provide for sustainable long-term care of excess unadoptable wild horse and burro in the most cost-effective manner in long-term pastures or partnership sanctuaries, with the first objective, not in any particular order, with one objective being provide additional capacity for the humane care of excess unadopted wild horses in long-term pastures and partnership sanctuaries. And I believe that this was what you told us about yesterday, that it's already moving forward. It is, we expect an RFP out for private land next Tuesday, March 15th, and with a little luck, hopefully, a second RFP that would deal with both private and public lands by the end of this month. Yeah. Did I capture that right?
I think our goal here should be to eliminate the need for this. Down to the point where we don't have to deal with warehousing unadoptable horses.
Is that the goal for place excess animals in private care? The goal should be to eliminate the need for
The need for
long-term.
that.
Okay, so that's on the next page.
Don't you hate people who read this stuff?
Yeah, I know.
Okay, so are there any questions specific to the first goal about the public and private land possibilities of partnership sanctuaries? Okay, objective 2 was, okay, well, objective 2 actually is part of objective 1, because it's actually something that should be included in that RFP. Because in order to qualify, you need to have a scenario in which it allows the horses to roam free. I mean, we're not talking paddocks or stockpiling, we're talking about more like the Bartlesville sanctuaries and things like that. Okay?
I guess one of the, a quick question on that for me is, has the, and I've touched on this, I think, once or twice, but I've spent a little time at the Black Hills Wild Horse Sanctuary, and it's a really, really nice facility out there, and the horses live kind of how you would really like to see them be able to live. And, you know, they've got a Dayton Hyde who set that up, has got a wealth of experience, and that may be something that BM could tap into if they, I don't know if there's a relationship.
Just a little history. It's because of BLM that Dayton Hyde has that.
Oh, yeah,
Because
yeah.
back in '86, BLM appropriated some funds
No,
to get that
I
started.
realize that, but I guess what I'm just wondering out loud is.
To parallel it.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a model. He's made a lot of mistakes and fixed a lot of things, and it seems to be working smoothly now. And I would just wonder if perhaps it would be worthy of a visitor, something just to look to see what he's got going out there, that's all.
Carla, those are the RFP for March 15th is almost out on the street. Was that a model that folks looked at in order to develop that RFP?
We had quite a few people on the team that developed the criteria that people will apply under, and yeah, the experience that we've gained and what works and what doesn't work, we wanted to make sure that our criteria that are laid out that people apply under are very clear so that they can tell us how they're going to do these things.
Right, but do you know whether that team who put the criteria together for the first RFP for private land looked at Black Hills as a model? I mean, Lily knows that, so I'm assuming that she,
Part of the criteria to be evaluated when they submit proposals are the opportunities to do ecotourism and the kind of things
Yeah.
Dayton Hyde. The proposals may include that, they may not, but it would be desirable because that's a potential source of income for the partner, thus reducing the
Correct.
cost to the government.
It's self-supporting, because, I mean, it really addresses a lot of this stuff, and, I mean, it seems to be doing very well right now, and, you know, since my time visiting there, it's only been the past year or so I don't know the history that went before it, I just know that what I'm seeing there now seems to be working, and it's self-supporting, and that's kind of what you guys seem to be looking for. My reason for bringing this up is that all of these horses that the government's paying to hold in long-term pastures this is a solution for them, something like this, a solution to those horses rather than being in there at government expense and taxpayers' expense. If they could be set up in places like that, even if you can only get one or two more going, it would still reduce the number that we're paying to house, and that's the only reason I bring it up.
Isn't that what this goal is all about?
Oh, yeah, I'm just reiterating.
Okay.
Okay.
this goal also talks about, you know, on private land and on public land. I know that BLM has been presented with a proposal that doesn't fit into either one of these because it has to do also with, you know, releasing animals. So where does that come in, you know, with an example would be an RTF proposal type. That it's not, it doesn't fit very neatly into either one of these.
At this point, we're trying to find places for excess animals, and if folks propose, now, we're not going out with a contract telling them what to do, we're going out with a request for applications.
Right.
So they'll tell us what they're willing to do, and we'll be able to balance, you know, how much it costs the taxpayer, how much it provides benefit to the horses. And through this agreement, they have to show that they're providing something to the mix.
Okay, so a proposal that, such as an RTF proposal, could be put in under the second one that deals with public-private land.
Yes.
And they have to, the onus is on them to tell BLM how it would work, et cetera, and all the details.
Yes.
Okay, thank you, that answers my question. Were there other questions or concerns about the pastures and partnerships sanctuaries? There was an objective 3, but again, we've covered that with the ecotourism and public viewing. Anna, how are we doing on time?
25 minutes.
Okay. Place excess animals in private care on page 9.
This is yours.
And I think this,
What I was saying.
I think this is one of the ones that we had gotten consensus that it's sort of a no-brainer, that we've got something that's working, and that we should continue.
Yeah.
Is that?
Yep.
Okay.
Yes, and that is the organizations that help us do this best, that we should expand our relationship with them. I mean, some of the other action items under here, I think are written pretty passively, and I think just need, it says send letters to and improve. I think, especially when we're talking about asking other agencies within the government, federal, state, local, to use wild horses first, that we just be more, that we lobby for that. That it's not just a recommendation or send a letter to or talk to it. The language just needs to be stronger in this section.
In which section?
In,
Action,
in some of the action items, if you go down, action 4 is send letters to federal, state, local agencies encouraging them to consider using wild horses in their field work. That's just an example of, we need to have an action verb there and take some action on this rather than just passively putting stuff out there and hoping it works.
didn't I see somewhere in here that there was a suggestion in the strategy to require some federal agencies to utilize wild horses?
Yeah, it's in here.
Is, okay.
I'm still back at the concern I raised a few minutes ago, and that issue's not addressed here, and that is it should be this expanding unadoptable horses into private care.
Okay, you're still back on, oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Renee said it's on this one, but I do not see it.
Oh, it would be if you added it.
And the point I'm getting at is, in the long run, we should be reducing the need to have to put unadoptable horses into private care. And that goal under pasture and partnership things makes no, talks about expanding it.
Under place excess animals in private care?
The goal, yeah.
Where it says place more animals into
Yeah.
private care.
That should be an interim thing. The long-term goal should be to reduce the need for placement of unadoptable animals.
I agree with you, Wayne, but I think we're gonna be, by the time we get this national science study and all that, we're gonna
Yeah.
be behind the 8 ball, so I think we need to,
Well,
But I'm
Put it in the
bothered
goals.
by our saying here that
that's one of the
our
goals.
strategy is to increase the
But
number
what
of
if we-
horses,
what if-
unadoptable horses going into private care.
But do we want to say that it's placing more animals into private care while reducing the need for long-term care or long-term pasture facilities?
And what I'm worried about is the unadoptables.
Right.
I strongly favor increasing adoption capacity.
Yeah.
But this back here is talking about unadoptable horses.
okay, the pastures and partnership sanctuaries, that's where the unadoptable horse would
Yeah,
go.
and that's my concern.
The place excess animals in private care, we're really talking about the adoptables. So if we
Yeah.
want to go back, then we need to turn the page back and go back to the pastures and partnership sanctuaries. And,
So I did read it.
Dr. Burkhart, you would agree that it's gonna be a long time
Yes.
before we don't need.
But this is a goal statement.
How would you change it? Say what you want it to say.
Well, I'm damned if I know. I have to think about that a little bit.
But the
But-
gist of it is, on the first goal, is that we want to, that while we want to do it in the most cost-effective manner, we want it, the need for it to decrease.
Yes.
That's the essential goal.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that may be what we take back.
So that, yeah.
The way that reads
We-
to me now is we're
And decrease
saying one of our
need.
goals is to increase the program to place unadoptables.
Gotcha. All right. Now, back to place excess animals, that's basically the adoption program. From time to time, this board has talked about a semi-privatization, the adoption program. And again, that's something thinking forward, but if we're talking about strategy, does this board want to go as far as to at least make that comment, whether it turns into a recommendation or not, about, you know, taking what we know is working, and having it, you know, fully funded if we can do that. But in addition, to really add that as a more of an integral component of the in-house adoption program. Or are we not?
Are you meaning that,
More of the
for
semi.
example, the Mustang Heritage Foundation as the privatized group that would manage an
Or
adoption?
portions of the
Portions thereof.
in-house, probably manage portions of the in-house BLM adoption program that have not routinely performed,
Yeah,
you know?
Yeah.
So, I mean, you have a good product that we know is good. And then we do know, because Sally gives us the statistics on the adoptions, that there are areas within in-house BLM adoptions that that could perform much better.
Yes.
And to utilize, that's what I'm thinking of in
well,
terms of
that makes good
semi-privatization.
sense. Yeah,
No,
Right.
that makes just good business sense. I mean, horses are gonna be a lot more adoptable with even a minimal amount of training. If they were simply lead trained, they would be quite a bit more adoptable if somebody could just lead them out and walk them onto a trailer. Never mind, you know, I don't even know if you'd have to go so far in some respects as to saddle train them if you simply had the horses lead trained. And it seems like some of the youth programs that they've got are kind of gearing towards that. So it makes a lot of sense to prioritize, at least throw some kind of priority in that direction to me.
see, that would be another component of increasing the adoption demand.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It then takes horses out of short-term, and
Yeah.
just all the sense in the world. And it would be interesting to see what the dollar amount per horse adopted through that cost versus how much extrapolate the numbers from a horse that sits in short-term holding and, what that costs to adopt out, and look at the difference in which one makes most sense dollar-wise.
Objective 2 does fall in step with objective 1, but goal 2 is develop a separate environmental education component for the Wild Horse and Burro program. I'm assuming that that's going to be very long-term, because do we have any kind of cost analysis for what BLM is thinking about? Is that a whole separate, is that a new person? That's on page 9 on the bottom. Goal 2, develop a separate environmental education.
You know,
component.
we have an environmental education group at BLM that helps us with all of our programs, and so, for example,
So that already exists?
it already exists.
Okay.
They just work with a specialist to get the stuff right.
Time check, you have 15 minutes for 3 more sections.
Okay,
Robin,
yes.
let's go back to this concept of privatization.
Mhm.
Okay, so, like, goal number 1, place excess animals into private care. Do we want to suggest that that might be place more animals into private care through the enhanced use of BLM's interaction with the Mustang Heritage Foundation or something along those lines?
I'm thinking it needs to be bolder and say that in some areas where adoption rates are below par or below expected target, that perhaps the foundation, which is a successful program, do those in-house adoptions.
That would be an action, though, not
Right.
incorporated into the goal.
Well, then,
Okay, well,
we got to put it in here somewhere.
So you
that-
see,
Robin?
you
but
see
that
on,
does place more animals.
Under
though.
objective 2,
Mhm.
action 2, it
Offer more.
specifically talks about the foundation.
Yeah, it
But
does.
only that 4,000 animals thing and similar proposals.
at this point, they propose to help us with trained animals, and this is where we want to focus their assistance.
Okay,
I think that's
Why don't we say that in objective 2 then?
okay. So just do more, okay. concentrate on objective 2 as opposed to objective 1. Okay, and then we decided that the environment and education component, that's already something that exists, and that they would be just encompassing the wild horse and burro program. And the objective 2 about the making sure that the BLM is already doing that and trying to, I mean, that's by law, to to continue to screen applications and to ensure that compliance is taking place. Okay, so animal welfare. We're moving kind of quickly, but animal welfare. It's basically to develop a comprehensive animal welfare program, a formal one.
We do, the Bureau does not have that now?
No. They have handbooks, and they have, IMs that, deal with the care and handling of the horses and the animals. But I think what was missing and what was identified as early as a year ago was an actual comprehensive program that would contain not only maybe a mission statement of sort, but also would have that self-evaluation that UC Davis is working on, would encompass whatever compilation of independent observers, whatever group it is, that whole thing. I think that was what I was reading from that. Is that correct, Carl?
And again, it's not that we haven't done any of these things in the strategy.
Oh,
We've been
God, no.
incrementally working towards them, but this basically focuses on it as a very primary thing that we want to be doing.
Robin, if it's a comprehensive animal welfare statement, or that's our function at this point, we're going to establish procedures. I think it's extremely important to add in this, and maybe it should be action number 1, is the consideration of the welfare of the horses on the range. All these actions are considered, essentially when we start to intervene with horse bands and herds of horses. I think it's important that we have a consideration, using some verbiage, that we consider the welfare of the horses on the range, which goes back to a whole bunch of other things, sustainable herds and healthy rangelands and everything else. But it needs to be a strong statement in the animal welfare section.
I agree with that.
Would that go up in the goals?
It maybe should be up in the goals somehow. I think it needs to be a very strong addition to that section.
But if we said something like humane care begins on the range through achieving and thriving ecological balance.
That's throughout our statutory requirement and everything else. I mean, but I'm just saying that we need to establish that in this section.
Great.
Okay. I had just a question about consider hiring a full-time animal welfare coordinator. Obviously, there's a budget impact, and that's probably not in the near future.
A lot of this
It's
is not in the
definitely
future.
still on the table. I think one of the first people we want to hire is a division chief, and then we want to get the census
Yes.
person. So there's a number of people in line to hire.
That's a nice thought.
That's a good point, Carla.
That's our goal too, Carla.
Okay. And again, the rest of the animal welfare thing sort of falls into place. Does anybody have any discussion points or questions with the remaining part of the animal welfare portion?
Just under objective 3, it talks about internal training for employees, volunteers, and contractors. We emphasize that, and it's the training on the animal welfare program and on natural horsemanship.
I know.
What are you wanting added to that?
It's just an emphasis on internal learning and training modules along with natural horsemanship type of thing. And I was gonna comment, every year, the wild horse specialists, for the long time had their annual meeting. But I know because of budget cuts, that hasn't happened. We've had a lot of years go by where, and again, there's a budget impact for that. Science and research. This is probably where we talk about the NAS. We've had a lot of discussion, a lot of questions regarding the NAS study. From Carla's slide, that would include censusing, monitoring, population growth, fertility control, the whole AML process, predation, genetic diversity. Those are the ones that I jotted down. I think there was a concern, I know I expressed a concern, okay, you do the study, it's 2 years down the line.
Yep.
You know, it's just it's the length that BLM is trying to implement a program as we speak. And while there are a lot of ongoing things, I think there may be some concern that while everybody's waiting for the NAS study, that something's going to ground to a halt. So, or isn't going to go forward. And I don't think that's the case, but I think that's a concern. So, other questions, points of discussion under NA? You were talking about the NAS study a bit.
But you said it all, that's fine.
Robin, I'd like to just say, I strongly feel that we should, objective 2, action 2, should definitely be followed through on. And that's where we're going to reevaluate or relook at the old recommendations from this board and see if they are still pertinent, or have they even been considered or pursued and accomplished. I think that's, we've made a lot of recommendations, and are they still floating out there, and are they pertinent or not? So there needs to be some review of the things we've already recommended.
Okay. I had a note here to myself, board liaison, Vern. Is this where Vern would Vern be? Are you expecting to be involved in this whole science and research as a liaison to the board? Is that, or is there some expectation? Since you are our science and research, you're a liaison to the research stuff that we've been doing.
Right. And they have telephone conferences and have a meeting periodically and that sort of thing. I don't.
Into the mic, I guess.
Tell me what more you were asking about, I guess.
I guess my question to BLM is, does BLM anticipate needing a board liaison to the advisory board for this whole segment of the strategy?
I think we could have board liaisons for all of the segments of the strategy if you're interested in doing that.
Okay, that might be a potential recommendation down the line.
Well, would our research board member be involved in this NAS study?
I would
I
think
think that's
not.
independent.
I would,
Study should be independent, I would think.
yeah,
Okay.
that's, because that's an independent study. Now, the other question that had come up was, is there need for new research? And have we adequately addressed that, meaning BLM? Has BLM adequately addressed that by what Dr. Kane had, provided us an update with yesterday? Or are we, I think it came out, there is no expectation for National Academy of Science to do further research.
Right.
Okay.
I think that we need maybe a third objective, which would be to implement or contract for research on issues as they arise, as they might affect the program, something like that. Because somewhere, somehow, things don't just stop because the National Academy of Sciences does a review and says, oh, we found another evaluation tool, use it. Research continues over time.
Objective 1, action 1.
Continue.
Perhaps you want to strike the word existing and just say, do research where it's appropriate.
But right now, it's just limited to existing research on fertility control. So expand that.
I think the message that BLM should take back from the board is that the board recognizes research as being something that is ongoing. It's not to replace, it's not to say that there isn't good research that we're working from now, and it doesn't negate what Dr. Kane's report was, because that's already sort of in the works. But we wanted to emphasize that research, new research, should be included somewhere along in this component. Did I characterize that correctly? Okay.
Robin, I do have a concern also that we perhaps, it's just a review, objective two says to review and evaluate current science applicable to wild horse and burro management. We tend to think just as, fertility control, some of the sociological implications of what we do with the horses. But I think one thing we're totally missing on a review basis, and the concern that came from the audience that I heard this morning, was that where's the science, for the range management side of things, which is involved with the setting of AML, and that goes clear back to the health of the horses. So maybe we should, as part of that program, because the Wild Horse and Burro program does not function in a vacuum. They're working within a mandate by the BLM to do a lot of other things.
So it's not just animal management, it's range science.
There should be some, just some statement, a review of, and perhaps of the dissemination of that information, therefore would come to the public
that'd be an
to
improvement.
understand how AML has been set in the past. Is it the best science? And because it seems to me like that is a concern by the public, that they're not getting enough of that. And I think because of that, there's distrust and misinformation all going around out there, because there's not that review that's being presented to the wild horse and burro people, or the advocates for wild horses and burros. That's a long way of saying we should include range management into that review.
Okay.
As like a fourth action item?
I would think at least an action item, yeah.
2.
Okay. Anna, you and I must be on different time things, because we have our break at 2:45, and I have 1:55.
Right, I thought we were taking an hour for this first review. Is it longer? It is, sorry. Yes,
So we're ahead?
we're ahead, but
Okay.
I think we could use the time because when we come back and cycle through.
Yes, okay, no problem. Okay, so anything else on science and research? Okay, and again, this is the first flyby.
Okay.
Public outreach. I know some of the things that I had heard, and I know just among the board members, it needed to be, I know that Sally and folks, and the folks who have been working on the website, have made very many improvements on the user friendliness of the website. But there are still areas in which it is challenging to find information. One of them was strategy, for example. So, and I've spoken to a couple of folks in the audience that, they haven't been able to find it easily. So I think one of the things that we want to make sure is that that we want to emphasize is the user friendliness. Did you have some things that you wanted to?
Sure. I think that we need to have better coordination between the Department of Interior's Public Affairs and BLM, Communications and Public Affairs. It just seems that it's just a little disjointed sometimes, so we need to be on the same page. And it just really needs to be a robust communication program to the public. For example, what is going to be an update to the public based on the strategy? So say, for example, the public comments come in the next 30-day period, the strategy is finalized. How do we get that word out to people to let them know, heard you, or, board made recommendations and things have changed and this is what it is now. So just on an ongoing basis, updates, especially about key accomplishments with the strategy or with a new program, and to just be coordinated with BLM and DOI's public affairs and communication groups.
Are there any questions or additions or points of discussion on the public outreach? This is,
How did you want to put that into the strategy then? We're all kind of sitting here trying to digest what you just said.
Okay.
better communication between DOI and BLM.
Communicate back to me, I guess.
It sounds like it could be an additional objective that we could come back to.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how I'd state it here. That's just an observation that I've had in terms of working with the strategy team. We always stumble upon communication issues. So that, we just need to focus on them.
Well, now that brings me up to what I was going to say, because when the strategy first came out, there were five. The original strategy was 5 components, and then 2 more got added, science and animal welfare. But one of the first 5 was communications, and that got knocked out altogether. And that does dovetail a little bit into, even though public outreach and communications is not exactly the same, it does interface with each other. So I would like to, I guess maybe send a message to whoever's listening, is that the omission of a communications as part of as part of the strategy is interesting at best.
Communication in its own right.
Right, exactly. Because if you remember, it was one of the 5 original components, and it just got knocked out altogether. And any of us who have worked with BLM, either through the advisory board or through independent organizations, with all due respect, oftentimes the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing. And then that just complicates things, because it gets misinformation out there. So and Carla, maybe you can speak to why communications isn't included in the strategy.
Well, I guess my question for you is that they've retitled some of the similar things as public outreach. But
No.
it sounds like what you're saying is BLM and the Department of
I'm-
Interior
when
need to
we-
have better
The
communication.
communications segment
Uh-huh.
of the original strategy
Mhm.
had to do with communications within BLM. It was in-house.
Okay.
It was in-house communication.
Okay, so we missed the in-house communication part by focusing on the outreach.
Well, public outreach is, I think, very important.
And we need to re-add in the internal communication.
But the internal communications involves training, media training, just knowing, having everybody be on the same page. And we run into situations where someone says, well, I heard so-and-so in BLM say this. And then another person will say, well, I heard so-and-so in BLM say this, and they're exactly the opposite. From a management perspective, that's the big issue that I would think BLM would want to address. And I just find it kind of odd that it got dropped out. So, I don't know how other folks feel.
Well, your discussion just now put me in mind of Tim's comments at noon
Right.
Right.
of the response he got.
But that also goes back to the training component, because the guys on the ground need to know how we got from A to B.
So, I mean, I would suggest to my fellow board members that might be a recommendation. And obviously, it's late date, you're you've got a deadline to meet. However, to go ahead and say something to the effect that the communications, its omission speaks very loudly. And it actually should be put back in some way, shape, or form.
I understand what you're saying, and like we're not waiting to the end of this to start things. We do have strategies to implement this with internal communications, internal training. We're working on that right now. So, but I appreciate you bringing that back. I think they wanted to focus on, the public keeps saying they need more information for us. So I think they lost the internal communication component. Well, you can certainly make that recommendation to put it back in.
I don't want to be stepping out of turn here, but some of the feedback I heard this morning, I'm not seeing I'm looking at Objective 2, Action 3, and I'm wondering if you might want to consider broadening that. I heard things around helicopter viewing, being able to see the gathers and other things. So I just want to re-raise some of the feedback to see if there's anything you'd like to do with that.
I'm sorry, you're on public outreach.
Objective 2, increase the availability of program information. Action 3 starts to get towards it in terms of website information, but it isn't as comprehensive, I think, as some of the feedback you heard, and I wanted to re-ask.
That's true, Karen, thank you, yeah, because there were some great suggestions about web streaming, videos, cameras, transparency. There's comments about transparency as a overarching comment for the whole strategy and the program, but we haven't used the words in the public outreach or communications section about transparency. So I think we need to be specific about that.
I think you could do it under Objective 3, to continue to make opportunities available for the public to view wild horse and burro on the range during gathers and at short-term, long-term holding facilities. Under that, we could put an action item, that if this board, consents on that, would have perhaps looking at video cameras on the helicopter.